A month had passed, and during that time things didn't exactly get better, but they got quieter. And now I live in another part of Tacoma, closer to the waterfront, where the morning air smells like salt and engine grease, and the windows no longer reflect familiar faces. And every day I walk past a bakery with a display window that now shows a different version of me. Not the one who packed a suitcase for someone else, not the one who looked for clues in someone else's vacation stories, but the one who's learning to hear her own thoughts again, even if they're not always nice. Every day I pass by the cafe where we used to sit by the window and argue over whose latte was better, and at first I'd look away, speed up, pretend to be on a call, but at some point I just stopped doing that, and now I walk by like it's just another building, another window, and for the first time there's no stomach twist, no ache in my chest, no thick wave of resentment rising up from somewhere deep. Just an ordinary morning, just another sidewalk. One morning I opened my mailbox and found a letter neatly folded inside with the King Foundation logo and a short note thanking me for contributing to an educational project for students. And I didn't read it once, but twice, then again, as if trying to absorb it into myself, to make it part of a new truth. That what I did wasn't a mistake or weakness, but maybe, in some strange way, something meaningful, even if I still don't fully understand how. While unpacking, I found an old unsigned card, the kind someone once meant to give but never did, and I held it for a long time, looking at the illustration of a teapot and a rosemary sprig, and for the first time I thought maybe I could sign it myself, not for someone else, not as a response, just from me to me. No big speech, no, it'll get better, just, I see you, you're here, you're moving forward. Lacey came to visit for the weekend with a suitcase on wheels, chaotic hair, and a box of mac and cheese. And for the first time in a while, we didn't talk about the past. No names, no chapters, no screenshots. Just put on The Great British Bake Off and ate straight from the container under a blanket, laughing out loud at someone's failed sponge cake. And it felt almost like happiness. The kind where no one asks how you're holding up because they already know you're not falling anymore. A couple days later, Jake sent me a picture of a new cactus he'd put on his windowsill, with the caption, "You left this at mine." I swear I didn't water it. And I laughed out loud, alone in my kitchen, holding a mug of coffee, and realized for the first time in a long time that the corners of my mouth lifted not out of politeness, but because something was genuinely funny, and maybe that's why we survive these stories. Not to forget them, but to feel warmth again after them. I went for a run, no headphones, no need to escape anything, just to feel how my legs moved, how my lungs worked, how the air smelled like bread and wet pavement, and no one waited at the finish line, no one waved, no one cheered, and that too felt like healing, like I finally belonged to myself again. On my voicemail there was a message. Short, unsteady, Elias's voice. Sorry I couldn't be the person you thought I was. And I listened to it once, didn't delete it, didn't save it, just left it there, like a note found inside an old book you're not planning to reread but can't throw away either. I didn't answer. Not because I was angry, and not because I hoped for something else, but because everything had already been said. In words, in silence, in actions, in long pauses, in all those gaps that no longer needed decoding. The story isn't closed because real ones never are, but it's done. Not forgiveness, not revenge, not indifference, just an ending. No headers, no takeaways, no desire to reread, just a period, after which you don't have to start a new paragraph. I got there early, sat down and pulled my coat tight around me, one I hadn't worn in forever, and then he showed up. No words, no extra gestures, wearing an old army jacket with worn elbows I remembered from pictures, and sat down next to me. Not too close, not too far. I pulled the silver dollar from my bag, placed it in his palm, and said, "This is yours." He looked at it for a long moment, then placed it back in my hand and said, "Your move now." He didn't say anything else, just stood up and walked away, not looking back, not glancing over his shoulder. And for the first time since all of this started, it was me sitting there alone in the quiet. That morning I went down to check the mailbox, more out of habit than actual need, because everything important comes to email these days. But when I opened it, there was an envelope. Not from a bank, not a delivery, no return address, just a typewritten line across the front and a perfectly folded sheet inside. And on it, centered with equal margins top and bottom, was one phrase: "Sometimes it's better to let people choose to be honest." At first, I didn't get what it meant or who sent it. But then I remembered. When I gave him back the dollar, he never asked, never said a word, just returned it to me, and only now did it click. He knew everything from the start. He'd known, he'd just waited, just watched. Let me carry the whole thing until I was ready to speak. And suddenly that didn't feel kind or generous. It felt like another weight, like someone had been holding a flashlight the whole time and simply waited for me to stumble into the light on my own. Lacey came over that evening with a bottle of white wine, a bag full of chips and cookies, and staged what she called a friend tribunal at my kitchen table, the kind where everyone gets a turn to vent and validate. And while I rinsed the glasses, she was already mid-rant, saying the whole thing was textbook emotional manipulation, that normal people talk like adults, not through cryptic notes typed on vintage machines. And if he knew, why didn't he say so? And if you wait for someone else to confess, that's not noble, that's cowardly. I didn't argue, didn't defend him, didn't try to explain it away, but inside everything felt detached, like we were talking about someone else, like I was watching an episode of a show I already knew the ending to, and still kept hitting next, just to find out the exact moment it all shifted from mistake to pattern. The next day at work, we got assigned a new project, a site redesign for a local charity. And in the partner logos I spotted it, King Foundation. And honestly, that hit harder than anything else before, because somehow, even here, even at my job, this story found a crack to leak through like rain through old windows. It took me hours, but I opened my account, clicked anonymous donation, typed in the amount, exactly $500. Didn't write a name, didn't leave a note, just hit send and closed the laptop, not to end something, but to maybe quiet that guilt long enough to breathe like I wasn't constantly owing someone something, even if I no longer knew who or why. The apartment started feeling smaller, like the walls themselves remembered every word said and unsaid, and I began packing things into boxes, even the ones I once called non-negotiable, and it all went fast, emotionless almost, until I found a card that said, "It can still turn out okay," and I realized I didn't want to live surrounded by objects that told me how to feel. Jake saw the boxes in the hallway and offered to help, and while we carried one to the elevator, he suddenly said, "Maya, the money thing, the jar, you know you're not the villain, right?" And it was the first time he ever used my name, not third floor lady, not just, "Hey." And I nodded without looking at him, because if I'd looked, I might have cracked, and I wasn't ready to break the one calm thing I had left. The move itself was quiet. No tears, no long hugs, no dramatic door moments. And when the car stopped at an old intersection near the bus stop, I saw him sitting on the bench, same jacket, head down, holding the jar, the same panda jar I'd once called compensation, and now didn't know what it meant for him or for me. He didn't lift his head, and I didn't get out of the car, just stayed put until the light turned green and the car pulled away. And in that moment, I felt like none of this was ever about guilt or forgiveness. It was about how sometimes people still miss each other, even when they know exactly where to look. I didn't know how to answer because saying yes felt like confessing to something, but saying no would be a lie. So I just nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, and he didn't push for more, didn't ask about the money or why I took it. He just said, "That's all I had left of him," and said it like he didn't expect me to respond, just needed to get it out of his chest. Then he looked at me again and added, "Did you see the silver dollar?" And in that moment, something inside me clenched, not like pain, but like a jolt. Like someone grabbed my wrist suddenly, and I nodded again, short, silent, because I couldn't tell what would be worse, admitting it or staying quiet. He didn't ask to come in, didn't try to step forward, didn't make a move toward the door. He just stood there for another second, then gave himself a small nod, turned around and walked away. And the only thing he left behind was the faint scent of rain-soaked fabric and this familiar unease, a silence that I stepped back into like a room where everything had already been packed up. Later that night, Lacey called me, said she couldn't sleep, and the moment I picked up, she blurted out, "Please tell me you're not getting pulled back into this." And I heard in her voice not anger, but exhaustion, like she'd gone through it with me too. And I didn't know what to say, because I wasn't even sure what I felt, so I just listened to her breathe into the phone and whisper, "You already made it out once. Don't go back." I didn't answer, just set the phone down beside me and opened the old photo folder, the one I hadn't deleted because I didn't know what to do with it. And in the middle of a dozen shots of us together, I found one, not even that clear, where we're sitting on a bench outside a building with a flag, and with us is an older man in a beige coat, kind face, hands folded in his lap. And suddenly I remembered. It was the same man on the checks I found in the jar. I opened one of the pictures and zoomed in on the writing on the back. Edward King Sr. I wasn't looking for any revelations, just sorting through old boxes because I wanted to free up shelf space for books and finally throw away all the clutter. And in one of the folders, behind a weird Christmas card and an old internet bill, I found a thin piece of paper with yellowed edges, and on it, written in neat but slightly shaky handwriting, it said, "For Elias's apartment. With love, Grandpa." At first, I didn't really get what it meant. I just read it and set it aside. But then things in my head started lining up. The jar of money, the silver dollar in the case, the name on the check, and suddenly it all stopped being some weird leftover from a past life and turned into something way bigger, something that honestly should have never ended up in my hands. I logged into my online banking, opened the old notifications I hadn't deleted yet, and saw that same transfer labeled King Memorial Fund. And something inside me went cold, because memorial always means someone's gone, and I hadn't asked, hadn't checked. I'd just spent it, thinking I had every right. But now I realized I didn't. I contacted the bank, explained that I had concerns about the source of certain bills, and at the branch they confirmed that part of the serial numbers really did match money from a fund set up in memory of a veteran named Edward King, and that the funds were meant to help his grandson finally buy a home. And I just stood there at the counter with that knowledge, which suddenly felt heavier than any suitcase I'd ever packed. Later that evening, I ran into Jake, and I asked, almost casually, if he knew Elias's grandfather, and he nodded, said the guy helped fix the gym at the local school and even organized a book drive for the library. And then he added, almost out of nowhere, "He passed this winter. Elias took it hard. He kept saying he didn't get the chance to make him proud." And in that moment, something broke in me, because I understood. I hadn't taken from someone who cheated or lied or disappeared into the background of another woman's vacation photo. I'd taken from someone who was holding on to the last thing connecting him to someone he loved, and now it was in my hands, and I didn't know how to carry that. I paced around my apartment, picked up the silver dollar, put it back down, stared at the note again, and couldn't figure out what was worse, giving it back and reopening the door, or keeping it and living with this invisible splinter under my skin that no one else could see but kept making it hard to breathe. On the third day, I gave in and sent him a short message. "Can we talk?" No drama. Just talk. He didn't ask why, didn't clarify, just sent back a location. Wright Park, the bench by the pond. For some reason, I walked outside, didn't even grab my jacket, because it felt pointless in that moment, and I came closer, and he didn't move. Just stood there like, if I turned around and walked away, he might stay there until morning. So I went back in, grabbed the blanket, the blue one with white stripes, and silently handed it to him. And he took it like it weighed more than it did, like he wasn't just holding fabric, but something else entirely. We stood there in silence, under a slow rain, him wrapped in the blanket and me just standing next to him, not knowing why this was happening or what came next. And then he finally said, "Did you find the jar?" No clarification, no emotion, just words that felt like they'd been sitting in his throat for weeks and finally fell out. I didn't know how to answer, because saying yes felt like confessing to something, but saying no would be a lie. So I just nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, and he didn't push for more, didn't ask about the money or why I took it. He just said, "That's all I had left of him," and said it like he didn't expect me to respond, just needed to get it out of his chest. Then he looked at me again and added, "Did you see the silver dollar?" And in that moment, something inside me clenched, not like pain, but like a jolt, like someone grabbed my wrist suddenly, and I nodded again, short, silent, because I couldn't tell what would be worse, admitting it or staying quiet. He didn't ask to come in, didn't try to step forward, didn't make a move toward the door. He just stood there for another second, then gave himself a small nod, turned around and walked away. And the only thing he left behind was the faint scent of rain-soaked fabric and this familiar unease. A silence that I stepped back into like a room where everything had already been packed up. Later that night, Lacey called me, said she couldn't sleep, and the moment I picked up, she blurted out, "Please tell me you're not getting pulled back into this." And I heard in her voice not anger, but exhaustion, like she'd gone through it with me too. And I didn't know what to say, because I wasn't even sure what I felt, so I just listened to her breathe into the phone and whisper, "You already made it out once. Don't go back." I didn't answer, just set the phone down beside me and opened the old photo folder, the one I hadn't deleted because I didn't know what to do with it. And in the middle of a dozen shots of us together, I found one, not even that clear, where we're sitting on a bench outside a building with a flag, and with us is an older man in a beige coat, kind face, hands folded in his lap, and suddenly I remembered. It was the same man on the checks I found in the jar. I opened one of the pictures and zoomed in on the writing on the back. Edward King, Sr. I was coming back from work in the evening, when the air was already turning into that damp blanket of coastal fog, and everything around looked like it was wrapped in some kind of watery hush. And in that soft gray stillness, with my heels tapping against the wet pavement, I immediately saw that someone was standing at the gate, not moving, not smoking, not looking at their phone, just standing there, staring straight ahead, and even from a distance I knew exactly who it was. He was wearing that same green jacket he'd always refused to throw away, the one with the ripped pocket and a stain on the sleeve that wouldn't come out no matter how many cycles you ran it through. And the fabric was drenched, covered in rain, like he'd been walking for miles without a hood, and he stood like he wasn't on my doorstep but somewhere between two timelines, the one where he belonged here, and the one where he was just a stranger in the rain. He didn't say a word, didn't smile, didn't apologize or make a move to come closer. He just stared, like even he wasn't sure why he came. And there was something in his expression, not angry, not pleading, but almost lost, that left this dent inside me. Not painful exactly, but like holding your breath too long without realizing it. For some reason, I walked outside, didn't even grab my jacket, because it felt pointless in that moment. And I came closer, and he didn't move, just stood there like if I turned around and walked away, he might stay there until morning. So I went back in, grabbed the blanket, the blue one with white stripes, and silently handed it to him. And he took it like it weighed more than it did, like he wasn't just holding fabric but something else entirely. We stood there in silence, under a slow rain, him wrapped in the blanket and me just standing next to him, not knowing why this was happening or what came next. And then he finally said, "Did you find the jar?" No clarification, no emotion, just words that felt like they'd been sitting in his throat for weeks and finally fell out. Every time I saw a black Subaru Forester on the street, my stomach clenched, because that's what he drove. And even though there are probably a million of those in Tacoma, my first instinct was still to think it was him, that he'd pull over, say something, and I'd forget everything and go soft again and let him in again. And I really, really didn't want to be that person anymore. One day I got a message from him. Just one word. Home. No period, no emoji, no sorry, no context. Like nothing had happened between us. Like we were still warm. And I just closed the screen, put the phone on the windowsill, and went to cook rice. Not because I was hungry, but because I didn't want to feel my hands shaking. A couple days later, weird things started happening. A trash bag by my door. Not mine. I remembered what color mine was. This one was from a different store. And a postcard in the mailbox. No address, no note. Just a drawing of an old house among trees. And maybe it was a coincidence, but something inside me flickered like I was being watched. Quietly. Persistently. I bought a new couch, small, light gray, from a more furniture clearance sale, and a blanket, blue with white stripes, the kind that makes you want to burrito yourself. And for the first time in a long while, I had the thought that I might actually stay here, not just wait things out, but settle, root in, even if just a little. I work from home as a digital project manager at North Point Design. We do landing pages for startups and UI for local brands. And I used to feel like I didn't deserve that kind of steadiness, like if things were too calm, something bad was about to happen, but for several days now, everything's just been flowing. Even the dog's not chewing shoes, and I don't feel anxious inside, and I'm not checking my phone every 3 minutes. And that, weirdly, is the best part of all this mess. Then one afternoon, I'm sending final feedback to a client, and I get a bank alert. A deposit has been made to Elias's account labeled K. King Memorial Fund. And I don't even know why I still get those. Maybe because our accounts used to be linked somehow. But the phrase, Memorial Fund, cut through me like a slap in the face. Of course, I asked myself, what if this was something important? What if I took what I shouldn't have? But then I remembered all the vague answers, the "I'll explain laters," and I pushed it away. Because I'm not responsible for saving someone who chose to disappear when things got real. I tried to tell myself that money is just money, not a symbol, not a legacy, not guilt, that it was in a jar that lived in our apartment, the one I scrubbed clean of him, the life he stepped out of by choice. And I have the right to stop feeling bad for thinking of myself for once. And so, for the first time since moving in, I started a conversation with my upstairs neighbor, Jake, the one with the maple leaf tattoo. We ran into each other on the stairs. He had a toolbox. I had groceries from Fred Meyer. And he asked if I was the one who used to live with the bearded guy and the German shepherd. And I said, yeah. And he casually said, I knew his dad. Good guy. Did a lot of work on school repairs around the district. And I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. And something inside felt heavy, like this whole story was suddenly bigger than me. I was coming back from work in the evening, when the air was already turning into that damp blanket of coastal fog, and everything around looked like it was wrapped in some kind of watery hush. And in that soft gray stillness, with my heels tapping against the wet pavement, I immediately saw that someone was standing at the gate, not moving, not smoking, not looking at their phone, just standing there, staring straight ahead, and even from a distance I knew exactly who it was. He was wearing that same green jacket he'd always refused to throw away, the one with the ripped pocket and a stain on the sleeve that wouldn't come out no matter how many cycles you ran it through. And the fabric was drenched, covered in rain, like he'd been walking for miles without a hood. And he stood like he wasn't on my doorstep, but somewhere between two timelines. The one where he belonged here, and the one where he was just a stranger in the rain. He didn't say a word, didn't smile, didn't apologize or make a move to come closer. He just stared, like even he wasn't sure why he came. And there was something in his expression, not angry, not pleading, but almost lost, that left this dent inside me. Not painful exactly, but like holding your breath too long without realizing it. I hesitated for like a second. Because, it's not mine. But then I remembered him posting stories from Palm Springs with the guys, while texting me he was working late. The lid popped, and I stopped hesitating. There was cash inside. A lot. Folded carelessly. Some bills bent 3 or 4 times. A couple slightly damp. Ugh. Mostly 20s. A few checks. One for $75 from someone named Landry. And a little note with a label that read, E. King Sr. That slowed me down for a second. Sounded family-ish, but I'd already opened it. Already pulled everything out. So I did the adult thing, laid it all out, sorted it into piles, counted in my head, then with the calculator. Don't judge, I suck at math. Final tally, $820, plus $1 silver in a little collector's case. Looked older than my entire adult life. I sat on the floor, just sat, then exhaled, and thought, okay, this isn't revenge. This is resource reallocation. I'm not draining his account. I'm not robbing his wallet. He's a grown man who decided a double life was acceptable. And I'm a grown woman who now has $820 to fund her move the hell on phase. Half an hour later, I was at Bluebeard Coffee on 6th Avenue. And for the first time in a month, I didn't ask for the cheapest Americano. I got myself a latte with oat milk and pecan syrup, topped with that fancy foam they usually save for people in trench coats. I was in an old hoodie with a wonky top knot, but for that one moment, I felt like the main character whose soundtrack just kicked back in. Right after coffee, completely on impulse, I walked into a salon on the same corner that takes walk-ins. Got a haircut, chopped off like 4 inches. Not because new life, new hair, but because I just wanted to. While sitting in the chair, I sent a voice note to Lacey. I think I've become a patron of the revolution, reallocating the wealth. Found a jar of money. Took it. Living. She sent back a meme. Karl Marx with the caption, "Redistribute the wealth," plus a fire emoji and a queen sticker. Not sure if that counts as emotional support, but it helped. Then I ordered an Uber home instead of walking in the rain, worrying about my shoes falling apart. While in the ride, I ordered sushi. Real sushi. With tuna, not fake crab sticks. So now I'm on the couch. Still the old one. Still the shared one. Place smells like ginger. My dog's curled up next to me. I've got a Diet Coke in hand, with actual fizz, small joys. And I'm wondering, is this bad? Like, Are people gonna say I crossed a line? But honestly, I don't feel guilty. Not joy either. Just quiet. Like I found not just money in that jar, but a pause button. A little moment to reset and decide what comes next. Gracie's snoring against my leg. Sushi's gone. His stories aren't showing up on my feed anymore. I accidentally liked one last week. Still cringe about it. I'm not making plans. Just put the rest of the money in a separate envelope and labeled it, "For things he didn't ruin." That's how my week started. If anything else happens, I'll update. And yes, I kept the jar. It's mine now. The panda represents the new economy. I've decided. After the jar and the sushi and the pecan latte and the new haircut and Lacey's memes and even one night of almost peaceful sleep, I decided it was time to take a breath and just focus on myself, without drama or outbursts or any of that noise. Just a quiet mute button, because if it's loud, it hurts. And I was tired of everything hurting every time I remembered I used to live with someone who built a beach story life on Instagram while I was making soup. I deleted our photos, not right away to be honest, because at first I sat and stared at each one wondering, did I already know then? Was I pretending not to? And then I realized that line of thinking was a trap, so I just wiped it all out. The Lincoln trip folder, that set of pictures where we're holding plastic cider cups and pretending we're happy like some rom-com, and that one where he's looking at me and I'm looking at him, and both smiles are real, and somehow it still means nothing now. I opened my spreadsheets. Yes, I'm the kind of person who keeps budgeting sheets, and saw that during the relationship I was covering electricity, internet, most groceries because his gigs were irregular, and I had a salary, and I never complained. I just did what needed doing, because if not me, then who? And now that it was over, I felt like at least I could close out the old balances, not to check off a box, but just to tell myself, you did good. You survived. You are your own home now. I'm not a thief, okay? But if you lie to my face for 6 months while sending beach pics to another girl, I think I've earned the right to take a coin out of the jar. Literally. And if that jar happens to have over $800 in it, well, sorry, that's just karma doing her job. Honestly, I didn't even mean to clean. I'm one of those people who stares at boxes for a week and then spends a day and a half sitting on the floor with a mug of coffee going, maybe I'll just sort the shoes. That's how it started. The weather was gross. Cold rain and wind. My dog, her name's Gracie, but I usually call her Fluffy Disgrace, had dragged leaves into the apartment again because she'd been digging in the ficus pot. I was mad. At myself. At her. At Elias. At the clouds. At some point, I grabbed a trash bag and started throwing random stuff in. Socks. His. An empty corn can. Mine. More socks. His again. How many did he have? That's when I noticed the jar. Tin, with a cartoon panda on it. The kind people used to throw spare change into, thinking they'd eventually buy a house or at least a pizza. It was half full of who knows what, half full of something heavy. I heard it clink when I bumped it with the broom. I'd seen it before, by the way. It used to sit on his shelf, dusty. I'd asked once or twice, "What's that?" He'd always brush it off. "Just junk from college, don't touch it. Old receipts or something." Cool. And now I'm sitting there on the floor, in pajama pants with a hole in the knee, holding this panda jar and seriously thinking it's either full of candy wrappers or something weird.